Hey there, my name's Jordan, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show. In this episode, I'm speaking with some of the governing body members of the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund. This fund is an example of a community loan fund that is democratically governed. So when we talk about building the new or investing in non-extractive economies, this is an example of what that can look like. This is not an investment recommendation, nor should this be interpreted as investment advice. One thing to note during this conversation is there are a few times where the internet connection was not as stable, so some of the audio might not come through as clearly. Done my best to edit it so that it comes through as best as it can, and that everything can be understood. Unfortunately, Cameron Smith's intro, Cameron is with the Equitable Food Oriented Development, EFOD, that you'll hear more about. Cameron's intro did not come through. The internet was too unstable at the time, so you'll unfortunately not get to hear Cameron's wonderful intro, but you'll get to hear Cameron later on in the episode. There are a few times where it might get a little choppy, and I think you can still understand the message that's being conveyed. So appreciate that, and we'll go ahead and get into the show. All right. Welcome, everyone. For those who are listening today, I am so thrilled to share that I have the JTIC Fund members or governing body who are here with us today. These are folks who manage other community loan funds that you'll get to hear from. So we have Lauren, we have Lupe, we have Cameron and Trisha, and they will all share more about themselves, their positions, the organizations they're with and representing, as well as the fund. And I'm just so honored and grateful to be in this space with them today. And for those of you who have been listening to this show, or maybe this is your first time, usually I ask folks to share their money story, but in this case, I'm going to ask each member to introduce themselves. And I'm wondering if one of you wants to take the lead on describing at a high level. I imagine for some folks, they're not familiar with the JTIC fund. So if you could share more about the fund, and then from each of you, more about what your organization does and how you became part of the governing body, that would be great. So I'll go ahead and pass it off.
I can get the ball started, and if my compañero can pitch in, but real quick, my name is Lupe Romero. I'm with the Climate Justice Alliance, along with Lauren, who will introduce themselves in a bit. And we're one of the, is it 5 of us or 6 of us, organization in the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund. And I guess just shout out to all my comrades in struggle, East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, Equitable Food Oriented Development Fund, the Moonsoon Fund, Right to the City, and ours truly, Climate Justice Alliance. But I guess the way I would describe our mission, I like to think of ourselves as like the Fellowship of the Ring. We're trying to end the extractive economy, which is quite literally destroying Mother Earth and creating, not to be dramatic, but to be real, an eco-social collapse. One of our glues is this idea of the just transition. Like, there's this world that we recognize is unjust, that is undermining our fellow human beings and other living creatures, but we can actually transition to a better world. whatever term you have. Like in CJA, we say the term regenerative economy a lot, but each community can call that or envision that as they will. But the point is that we're trying to get resources that are fueling this current system into the one and put it into the hands of our communities and our members to create the world that we want to live in. And we believe that in the financial sector, we can make a huge intervention. So we can provide our folks with the technical and material resources that they need to make that into a reality. So that is a little bit how I would describe it. But Trisha, Lauren, Cameron, I don't know if y'all want to also introduce yourselves and add to what I started.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks, Lupe. So, my name is Trisha Chakravarti. I am with the EFOD Fund, the Equitable Food Oriented Development Fund. And we're a member of the JTIC Fund Governing Board, facilitate our own community controlled fund. And we are also a national alliance of community-based frontline organizations that are working in food and ag justice. We are all based in working class communities of color, and communities that have had historic experience with disinvestment and extraction. And the members of the EFOD fund have had a difficult time accessing the capital to grow their work. And so we came together to try and build out financial and peer support resources for each other. Those of us that started and founded the EFOD Collaborative, we knew that the kind of capital that's necessary for development work, specifically in food and agriculture, that's community owned, community led, where the decision making is actually led by people impacted by the decisions that will be made. That kind of capital is not really available in a lot of places. And so the JTIC fund is one place where we are with our peers trying to move that money and those resources to the leaders and the organizers who are actually building out long-term community solutions that are trying to address the movement towards just transition. And I can share a little bit about myself. I'm based in Oakland, California. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so sorry for the sniffles, but I am the child of South Asian immigrants, and the granddaughter of people who fled and fought during partition, fled from what is now Bangladesh to what is now India. And during that process, I think what was really instilled in me was the way that colonialism and extraction does separate us from our own sources of wealth and community and power. And, particularly I come to this work because of the food connection and how the British stole food resources from South Asia and from Indians. But I think the idea around building self-sovereignty and decision-making tables for ourselves is really what grounds me and keeps me connected to the larger goals of EFOD and Just Transition and the JTIC.
Hey everyone, this is Lauren Ressler from the Climate Justice Alliance, and I'm so honored to be here with all of my compas from the JTIC. I know Lupe gave a great introduction to what the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund is. I wanted to share a little bit more about the Climate Justice Alliance. We are an alliance of 94 frontline community organizations across the continental U.S., Puerto Rico, and Guam. We came together 13 years ago to create an epicenter for the environmental justice movement, recognizing that our power is so much greater when we come together. Our members are doing everything from resisting pipelines and data centers to building food sovereignty projects that are feeding entire communities. And I got into this work. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest originally, in a small farming community in central Washington state, and saw the rise of LNG and coal export terminals trying to move coal from Montana mining communities through the central agricultural heart of the Pacific Northwest and out in the deep water ports all along the Washington and Oregon coasts. And so I've been doing this work for over 17 years, and in the last decade have really focused on the way institutional investors actually uphold the fossil fuel economy, the extractive economy, when they whether they're universities or foundations, have a mission that is exactly opposite that. And so I'm excited to get into this conversation with everyone today.
Thank you so much, all of you. And Lupe, I know you were able to share a lot about the fund. Anything about yourself that you want to weave in before we dig into any more of the conversation?
Well, I guess the way I ended up in this, and it might come out in the other questions, but I'm a Mexican immigrant, and my first step into this kind of work was when I was in a silkscreen print shop that we tried to convert into a cooperative, and it was a trial by fire, and I learned both the beauty of owning things collectively and also the struggle of doing that when you don't have the resources or the support to do so. But that's what I loved about joining Climate Justice Alliance when I saw they were seeking someone that had kind of like that foot into like business and also activism and connecting that to the struggle to save Mother Earth. So I feel like I'm in a very special place. And there's more to that, but I think it might come out later.
Thanks so much for the teaser. I love it. I have so many questions that I'm excited to dig in with you all. And before we really jump right into it, key theme that I heard in most of your intros is about how, and Lauren, you said this almost verbatim, but how institutional wealth holders or hoarded wealth in general actually does, even in a philanthropic sense, can and does uphold the extractive economies, systemic oppression. And I feel like that's a really key point as we soon get into integrated capital and the importance of it. And so I'm just wondering if anyone, can you speak to that a little bit more, just to kind of share, in what ways do you see this play out, and really kind of speaking to a lot of the inherent contradictions that I see come up in philanthropy?
I think that we often discount the role that the financial sector plays in upholding the values of the extractive economy, and that it sets the terrain upon which everything that we do is kind of arbitrated in society. And what I mean by that is our current legal system, our current financial system is set up to benefit wealth holders. It's not set up to benefit community members. And if you are following the rules and you are doing the default options, investing in the stock market, which is what most people do because there are very few other options currently, you are feeding and you are providing your resources as additional capital to fuel the mechanisms that are already at work. And those things go on whether you're trying to screen out fossil fuel companies and you're still investing in the tech sector. You're not thinking about the minerals used and extracted to build the technology that we're using. You're not thinking about the water that's being guzzled by AI and data centers currently. All of these things that it feels like we are opting into, whether or not we're choosing that path. And so what we're really trying to do is bust a lot of the myths currently around risk and return, around the goals of our financial industry, because currently, if the goal of capitalism is to benefit wealthy people and maintain the power imbalance that currently exists in society, then we can set new goals. We can set goals that we believe that the highest value of our economy is that people have everything that they need. They have food, they have housing, they have education, and are living lives that are meaningful to them. And in order to do that, we have to retrain the entire economic system to focus on those goals. And we need to recognize that maximizing profit is inherently antithetical to life. And we need to recenter life in our economy.
To add to what you said, Lauren, I feel like it's fun in the finance system. You can tell a lot about what is enforced and the real values of society because, there's the fiduciary responsibility. So it's ingrained by law that the people managing wealth have to increase profit. There's nothing saying that, okay, you can do that, but you cannot contaminate the air and water of people. But God forbid, you don't maximize that profit. That is the scene on this system. And what Lauren was alluding to, part of what we're doing is redefining finance, because when we talk about investments or return, it's what better return there is than having a world where people drink clean water, where everyone has a roof over their heads, food on their belly, when they're not feeling the pressure of competing with each other to survive. That's the kind of return and benefit that under the current system is completely neglected. And we're kind of changing the story and changing the language that we use when we talk about finance.
I was going to add, you said it really well, Warren and Lupe. And one of the things that we as organizers and folks working to support people on the ground know is that also that wealth is created so inequitably. And what you see in philanthropy, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later in the conversation, is they have these huge endowments, these foundations that are already built on the wealth of extracted labor, extracted bodies, extracted lands, like Cameron was talking about. They now have the entire sides of their foundations that are built to building that wealth and investing in the stock market, investing in growing that wealth in ways that are often totally antithetical to their grant-making priorities or the way they talk about wanting to support communities that are really struggling. So it's also, we think about who is actually building and growing their wealth through these financial systems, and it's not spread evenly at all. And philanthropy has to answer to that at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Cameron, anything you want to add?
So part of the thing that I think that a lot of us have a struggle with is the mission and the vision and the strategies that are portrayed out there. What is stated as the stated purpose of philanthropic giving is, you see on their website, to ameliorate poverty. You see on their websites to increase economic mobility, to increase food security, to increase home ownership, to increase wealth building strategies for Black and Brown communities and immigrant communities of color. And oftentimes, what you see, who actually receives the resources and receives the support and receives a lot of the privilege of being able to have those funds, are people that are actually, in terms of bringing about the outcomes and in terms of their track record, have been doing the same thing over and over and over again. And part of the reason is because they're those organizations that are able to receive the lion's share of the funding, because most philanthropic dollars, specifically, I think less than 5% go to Black and Brown-led org. Between 1% and 3% go to Black, less than 1.5% to 3% or less goes to Black or Brown-led femme or women-led orgs. And if you look at the work being done on the ground from a community-rooted perspective, women and femmes are doing the lion's share of the work in terms of trying to hold our communities together. But we're receiving less in terms of organizations that were created by Black and Brown women and femmes that we're accountable to our communities and that are not created centering what makes the people that have all the power and resources feel good all the time. And so it gives me a pause to say at some point I was like, well, maybe it's just because we haven't articulated our many years ago, maybe we haven't articulated ourselves enough. Maybe we need to come up with more direct action strategies. Maybe we need to, just trying to bend and move in many different ways, trying to share or make it clear what we're about. But I've come to realize that that's not the case. I've come to realize that a huge amount of this is really wrapped up in people's ability to basically look at their biases, to understand that people that are coming in and doing work on behalf of community is what has gotten us into these situations in the first place, versus the people who have been directly impacted historically, who are actually accountable to their communities first, that are accountable to people who've been extracted from and who know what's best in terms of moving forward from a perspective that centers the economic autonomy and resilience of Black and Brown people. The reason why, in part, in this economy and this world, in the Western community and the Western hemisphere, we don't have anything because the United States is built on capitalism, is that we own less than we own from a Black perspective than we owned during Jim Crow and Reconstruction. Black people actually had more cumulative wealth than we do now. What we have is a bunch of degrees with a huge amount of debt. And we've been trained in the fine art of systems thinking and systems activation that has benefited the top 5 to 1% of the population in terms of wealth accumulation, but it has not benefited us. And so I think we need to come back to the conversation. Number one, people that are sitting in philanthropy need to have what I call it from the South, a come to Jesus moment, just admit we are uncomfortable giving Black and Brown people the resources that they need. We are okay that they are not actually reaching these goals. We are okay that people are still starving. We're okay that people lack economic mobility. We are still going to fund all of these other organizations that we feel comfortable with, but are not actually delivering on the promises of us ameliorating poverty, feeding people, actually helping people to feed themselves, more importantly, because that's really the important part, is not creating systems where people are always leaning on something, but more upon the lines of people building systems that actually enable them to control their own economic destinies and outcomes that are not rooted in extractive policies and economics. And that type of work is always questioned. It's hardly ever funded. And quite frankly, if it is funded, it's funded just enough to fail.
So many truths that y'all just spoke to. So thank you. And I think it's so important to just name that because all of the hoarded wealth then gets further extracted and redeployed and controlled by the top 1 to 5%. And it makes me think about the just transition. When we look at the main purpose is enclosure and wealth and power, like you all shared. The economic system is going to work as designed. So if that is the intent, that is ultimately what happens, and we see that play out. And it also makes me think about how integrated capital is a strategy to move us to be part of that transition to a regenerative economy that actually does focus on social and ecological well-being. And so there's a lot of terminology when we get into talking about different community loan funds and even going beyond wealth redistribution, or more commonly referred to as charitable giving. So I'm wondering, we have a lot of listeners who either work in philanthropy, are already engaged in donor organizing spaces, maybe are just starting to think about or break away from more traditional impact investing. So I'm wondering if one of you could share in kind of simple terms, how would you explain integrated capital?
I'm happy to kick off some response to this one. I think with integrated capital, it's in the name. So when we hear the word integrated, we think of different parts coming together to create a whole. And that's what we're trying to do with our fund. We're trying to recognize the essential role of grant capital, investment capital, non-financial capital, the knowledge, experience, expertise that people bring to the work that they do. And blend that together in order to bring projects to life. And what we're trying to do, and the reason that it's critical that communities are being invested in addition to grants being moved into communities, is ultimately being dependent on grant funding is not a strategy for winning. It's not a strategy for sovereignty. It's not a strategy for independence. And what we're trying to do is build economies that produce things that are valuable to the communities around them and that earn revenue that allows those projects to sustain for the long haul. People are growing food, they're creating renewable energy, they're doing all of these things that communities actually need, and they own it. And the profit is being shared among the people, both that work in the businesses that are being developed, as well as community members themselves in the form of lower rates, lower prices. People can afford the things that they need. And ultimately, what we need to do is change the culture around investment. I think venture capital and private equity have done terrible things to small businesses, to communities. They've tried to strip all of the things that actually are the essential value of businesses. They're there to extract and not return wealth back to community. And what we're trying to do is create economies that benefit everyone involved. And we need patient capital. We need slow money. We need people to trust in the long-term vision of our member communities. We need time to learn and grow. We need flexible rates. And we need a lot of creativity and experimentation. And our members are out there building the things that everybody needs. And so we need folks who currently are wealth holders to be investing in places like the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund, like our individual funds, in order to funnel the nutrients into this living system that we're building.
Yes, just to give an example, one of our members, the Trade People's Food Co-op, is in a community-owned grocery store in Detroit, meant to fight food apartheid, to empower the Black and Latinx community. So they have a grocery store that, did receive like investment that will be returned in form of capital. But even before that, they had funds to do community outreach. That's not money that was returns, but it was just as necessary, because that community outreach is what made sure that this community-owned grocery store was truly a project that spoke to the people, that had a community participation, and that's what made a difference in the community being like, yes, this is our community grocery store. Because, without the integrated concept, you could say, okay, the pro forma says, like, these are the expenses, this is the revenue, this will be paid back then, and it could completely ignore, like, the social aspect of doing something as crucial as community outreach, but that is just as important in the success of this community grocery store. And we know that from all the community grocery stores that haven't made it, so that's how I know it makes a difference.
Thank you. And sometimes a visual that I like to share when I'm talking to clients about integrated capital is almost thinking about it as like a ladder with different rungs, and you need all of those rungs to climb up the ladder. And so, like Lauren and Lupe were mentioning, it's a mix of loans that can be non-extractive. It's a mix of grant capital, and also non-financial capital. So for thinking about each rung, try to imagine a little rung for each different area, all coming together to create this ladder that actually supports organizations for longer periods of time, and in a lot of ways, from a financial perspective, de-risk or then allow them to get access to other lines of credit that otherwise they might not qualify for. And so I see this come up with clients all the time is, why would an organization or a community loan fund be looking for a loan as opposed to a grant? And it almost feels kind of like this binary of like, well, why give a grant or why do a loan? Just to kind of go a little bit deeper into that, can you share why the blending of the capital would be more desirable. And I know it can depend on a lot of different circumstances, but yeah, can you speak to the why behind that a little bit more? Yeah, Lupe, go ahead.
It's funny because even our own members of the Climate Justice Alliance ask us the same thing. Why do you do loans? Doesn't that seem more capitalist? And the truth is we need it all. There are programs that don't make sense to fund through loans. There are survival programs, crucial emergency things. So we do need that for sure. But we also are trying to create an alternative economy, whatever you want to call it, where we're not depending on philanthropy forever. We're trying to really have our communities be autonomous and be able to own the resources and learn how to govern them. And lending helps us do that. We call that productive sustainability. So we could have, a program to give folks like a basket of food, but even better if we have like farm worker owned cooperative that actually has the capital and support to be able to be sustainable and doesn't depend on grants. That's gonna be like much more impactful. Also, something that we like to share is that lending among our movements is kind of like similar to a seed library. In a seed library, you can get access to the seeds, just like, in our case, you can get access to the capital. And then you can take that seed and you are, putting it on the ground. You get support of saying, okay, what are the best conditions for this little seed to sprout? How do I take care of this crop against this plague without using pesticides, of course? When is it the best time to harvest? So in the case of a seed library, you go through that whole process of going from seed to harvest. And the person or the organization or the cooperative farm that got access to those seeds now has not only the return in terms of like harvest and more seeds that they can give back to the seed library, but they also got support while they were growing the crops, and now they have that knowledge that they can also share with others. So with lending is similar. We recognize that this world is unjust and we're trying to create a new one. So when we do lending to our members who have stuff like, like farm worker cooperatives, grocery, community-owned grocery stores, community solar, when they go through the experience of it, saying, okay, I have this capital, I'm going to put it to use so that we have this community-owned project. Is one, they learned a lot, they received support throughout the whole process, and then that wealth can come back and go to another community to put it to good use. And not only does that wealth itself come back, but we also have that gain knowledge and expertise. So we start creating like a cycle. It starts circulating among our members. We learn how to govern that wealth democratically instead of being in the hands of a few people for the sake of further wealth accumulation. We're like, okay, we have like this wealth circulating amongst us. What is the best way to deploy it? What is the best way to support those who are putting it to use? And we always get more in return in the ways that matter, and it can go back to other projects. So that's why loans, even if at the beginning it seems counterintuitive, is what allow our communities to, create their own wealth, to take control over their own needs, and start creating that world that we want to live in. So I don't know if any of y'all want to add to my response. So that's how I like to answer that question.
Sure, yeah. And I think that's I was thinking about so many things as you were talking, Lupe, like just the like seed bank example, but also like that's why it's essential that we have loan funds that are governed by and accountable to community and led by community members, because yeah, it is kind of messed up. And in an ideal world, we would have reparative capital where community projects are getting $10 million in grants and they don't have to pay it back. But this is us, we're trying to build within the system, trying to build an alternative and trying to build a parallel that is controlled by us. And so we recognize that investment is essential for things like ownership of land or property or long-term like mortgages. Those kinds of things are not going to be paid by a philanthropic funder in most cases. And yet we also don't want to enrich the conventional capital and wealth holders who do make those loans out. And so we are this is our attempt at trying to recreate and build an alternative form of this process that, rather than extracting and enriching outside forces, actually recirculates the money like Lupe was talking about, and actually does come back and go back out into investment into another community organization, into another development project. I mean, I think grants are absolutely essential, and in an ideal world, most of our members would probably prefer that they didn't have to pay back the money, but that is not the world that we live in. And so we're trying to work within and outside of that system to build a parallel universe that's controlled by us. And I can give, another example too is an EFOD member, an organization in DC called Dreaming Out Loud. They got those like rungs that you were talking about, Jordan. Like they got access to a lot of different types of support and capital in partnership with EFOD. So they came into the collaborative initially by receiving a few rounds of a grant. And that helped them do, organizing, programmatic work, stabilize their finances while they started doing pre-development for what has become the Marion Barry Market. And that's a development project in Ward 8, one of the few retail spots in that neighborhood in DC. And EFOD was able to then give them a zero interest bridge loan and peer-led technical assistance along the way so that they could get ready and gear up to open that market. And this helps them manage their cash flow. They don't have to go into debt while they're opening the project. And they have the training and, importantly, a community of support around them when they actually do open that market space. So we're trying to meet all of the needs of the different stages of these types of really essential community assets.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. And I think that provides really helpful foundational knowledge to share more about how the JTIC fund works. Some key things that y'all have already brought up. It's a democratically controlled fund, which I hope to dig into in just a minute. But I'm wondering, I'm so curious to hear, maybe one of you can share a little bit about how did the fund come into being? What are the origins of it? In what ways is it working to expand the larger movement ecosystem or be accountable to social justice movements, be accountable to the just transition theory of change?
I can get the ball rolling if that's okay. So alluding a little bit to the personal and then connected to CJA, like I said, I was part of a silkscreen print shop that we tried to convert into cooperative. That place was refuge for undocumented people, which I was at the time, formerly incarcerated folks, and a lot of people so many of us were like one step away from homelessness, and more than once, actually, some of us lived at that print shop at times. And when we tried to convert it, like I said, even though I have never worked so hard for less money, like we barely had enough cash to buy ourselves a burrito, like we still got a taste of what it's like when you, to use the fancy language, own the means of production, when you have power over a place where you're producing something. So we would do stuff like close down on May 1st. A lot of our friends are activist teachers, so we would help them do workshops with the youth. And like I said, that unfortunately failed. So lack of capital, a lack of access to capital and technical assistance made a difference. But like that still it was still a powerful experience to have that kind of power. And I was like, I want others to be able to have this experience, but with the resources and expertise that is necessary. And what I liked a lot about the Climate Justice Alliance is that they see that connection between between climate and the economic system, and that and that in order for us to save Mother Earth or protect her, we need to change the economic system that we're part of. And finance plays a role into that. And one of our strategies is the reinvest strategy. So we want to divest from the extractive economy. Divestments are a strategy for social movements, but we have also learned that we need to then reinvest into the alternative. Otherwise, you're playing like a game of whack-a-mole with like the different actors that we are fighting. And then on top of that, we need to also learn how to govern wealth. We have been, deprived of it for so long that we also need to exercise that muscle of self-governance. And that is like what drew me both to like CJA, and that drew me to the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund. It was a place where we can learn how to do that governance, where we're helping divest and reinvest into a different kind of world. But I don't know, Cameron, Trisha, Lauren, I think y'all have plenty of that. I just wanted to get the ball rolling.
Maybe can I pass it to Cameron? Do you want to talk about getting involved with JTIC?
Yeah, I can speak. I mean, I was first introduced to JTIC via a good friend of mine, Anthony Chang. And so it came to me in my capacity at EFOD and asked, would I be willing to serve EFOD in the capacity of being on the governing body of this new integrated capital fund. And I said yes, primarily because I wanted just to be of service and of help to our mission and our goals at EFOD. But I also was very interested in learning even more about non-extractive ways that we could create new systems. And so I was really thrilled and just grateful to be in the space with everyone. EPOD introduced this system to me. That was the first area that I was introduced. But when I came into this space, it was a way for us to basically challenge the current climate. And I know the first fund that we had given, it was kind of like a testing case for us as a group of folks, everyone coming to the table, really having a very clear analysis on what reparative financial systems look like, what extractive financial systems look like, what non-extractive systems, financial systems look like, and the differentiation between those areas from the JTIC perspective. But because it's been so deeply ingrained in us, we kind of started falling down those same paths, and we had a case study for ourselves to kind of assess how we did our first loan. And it was just a learning opportunity, I think, for all of us on that road to actually create something that's new. And so the second loan from moving forward to the loans now had been much more rooted in who we are as a community, built on relationships, built on wanting to see healing and wholeness, and also built on strategies that include how do we do conflict resolution? Because you never know, because we're all human beings and we want conflict resolution tactics that are not punitive and that are not built on extraction, but are built on relationships and loving each other and wanting to make sure everyone is taken care of and not coming from a scarcity mentality. And so we've been able to kind of build those together as a community, a practice, and more along the lines of, in my opinion, what's even deeper as a community of relationships. Oftentimes you hear communities of practice, but they're built on a construct of individualism. And individualism doesn't work for people like myself and Lupe and Trisha. And even it doesn't work even for Lauren, because the greatest percentage of poor people in the United States are who? Are white people. And so just tearing down all of this ways of being. It's been a really great and liberating space for me as a practitioner on the ground doing this work to kind of liberate these systems that have been created and justified and upheld ways that have been harmful, but us for actually giving life to these systems. So I'm really grateful for being in the JTIC space.
Yeah, I just want to echo back what Cameron just said. And I think the relationships that have come out of this initial, I'd say, experiment in trying to liberate more capital together than we could as individual organizations has brought a deeper level of trust in peership than I've experienced anywhere else doing this work. I think that there is a level of vulnerability we've been able to access over the last 3 years in sharing not just our successes, but our failures, learning from the attempts that we make individually, recognizing that each of us is also accountable to a greater community. So a lot of what we do, it takes time, it's slow. We have a very consultative approach to the way that we are doing lending. I'm also really proud that we've been able to move $5 million in the last 2 years to incredible projects all over the country. Shout out to Right to the City and EB-Prec in particular. And there's still so many more communities that have incredible projects that are left to fund. And we really hope folks listening to this podcast take an interest and get in touch with justice funders. Find ways to invest in this fund. It's making a huge impact. And I wanted to maybe Tricia, do you want to talk a little bit about our core values and some of the pillars of the work that we're supporting?
Sure. Yeah. Part of the impetus around building out the JTIC fund and some of what we've talked about is that this is a way of us building that muscle within the philanthropic sector. And the JTIC fund is facilitated by Justice Funders, which has a lot of practice and experience and expertise in building these kinds of containers for philanthropy to ask questions in safe spaces and build that muscle and develop tools in a shared kind of industry space and bringing them into the conversation around what do communities actually need to sustain and own and design our own futures. And so the 4 kind of core values of the JTIC fund are local community control, non-extractive finance and being in right relationship, rematriation of land, of assets, and reparations. And we know that those are the principles that we need in order to move our communities forward in a way that is equitable and responsive to needs on the ground. And we're really fortunate to be able to do that along with our amazing community of peers in the JTIC fund. Is there anything else, Lauren?
I think maybe the last thing that I forgot to add is I really appreciate the way that CJ originally got involved. And thank you, Cameron, for mentioning Anthony Chang, one of our dear, dear friends. I also wanted to name Yuki Kitakoro, who is really the heart of the Climate Justice Alliance. She is the founder of the Reinvest program here and was one of the people involved in creating the Just Transition Investment Framework, which is available on Justice Funders' website as well, too, which walks through a deep dive into what integrated capital looks like and was a product of love from movement leaders from across many different spaces. And I just wanted to acknowledge the incredible people that built that framework that kind of underpins everything we're doing together.
Thank you all so much. And I think just one thing, especially what Cameron was naming earlier, the learnings that come out of this fund, the democratic governance, the prefigurative new ways of being, something that I just want to keep lifting up is these are returns. They might not be financial returns, but these are returns that actually help scale this infrastructure and actually help us win And so I think that's something that if we were in a purely traditional finance world, those would be considered externalities or things that get left out. But those are really tangible returns that we also need to be reimagining what return looks like. So I really appreciate y'all naming those. The last big question that I have, and it's something that I've heard come up in different spaces, is what I would consider a critique of a fund of funds approach. If we think about the JTIC fund, it is a fund of other community-controlled, democratically controlled loan funds. And I've heard a critique that it is quote unquote more impactful, better to just do like direct deals or to just do investments directly with each individual community loan fund or each individual project or organization, so that more money is going to the work on the ground as opposed to the administration of the fund. I'm curious how you all respond to that, as I also see this fund as building infrastructure, building the plumbing of a new economy as well. So yeah, curious how you balance the tension that comes with that.
So I think in terms of the lack of disparity, I think it has to be a both and scenario, because I think either or comes from scarcity mentality. And so thinking from that perspective, it's going to have to take a both and effort for us to be able to pull through for communities of color who are going through a reimagination of redlining right now. I mean, that's what's happening in historically Black and brown communities. I remember when you could buy a house that needed renovation, but it was like $10,000 to $15,000, $20,000. Now we're looking at those houses going for a minimum of $200,000 to $300,000, and then once they're renovated, they're going for $500,000. The things that we've studied and looked at and we thought we learned from in this nation, how we're reimagining them and creating these systems in their embodiment. So it has to take a both and scenario. We have both reparative loans and also non-extractive loans, reparative funding, which means money that needs to be returned to communities with no expectation of repayment, as well as loan products that we manage ourselves to do capital building, to be able to purchase commercial property, to be able to purchase land, to be able to build. So it's going to have to be a both and scenario, not either or.
And I think the only thing I'd add to this too is all of us here are organizers. And so the work that we're doing as a fund of funds is organizing philanthropic institutions, traditional wealth holders. At CJA, our members are doing so much critical work on the ground and having back and forth communication with funders, trying to demonstrate the proof of concept of the work that they've been doing for decades that has been changing so many lives, is an added level of work that we are able to take on in our role. So that's something that comes up a lot, is how do we change the entire process so that moving forward with direct investments, we have had the negotiations. We've organized the wealth holders to make the process so much more straightforward, liberate a lot more capital than they were willing to do beforehand. None of this 5% maximum situation. And how can we play that role from the position that we have to just get the resources where they need to go? If anyone else wants to add anything to that.
I think we did the math. How many members do we represent collectively?
I think
Think you
it's over
said
300.
Yes.
I so appreciate the thoughtfulness in that. And yes, a both and. We need it all. And it's like we covered so much. And I also feel like we just dipped our toes in. I so appreciate y'all being willing to share and open the lid on this conversation. And so my final question for you all is, if you could wave a magic wand, what do you wish listeners of the show already knew about?
If I could wave a magic wand, I would wish that listeners of the show understood that the real risk involved in any of this is not taking action.
Yes, I'll add to that, and that the real return is a world where we have clean air, clean water, and everyone is able to live a dignified life.
I think if I could wave a magic wand, I would want your listeners to know that the incredible wealth of knowledge and expertise that there is in stewarding resources, in managing property and land assets, in wealth building, that just needs to be resourced. We're trying to paint a picture of like the importance of ownership, and that is actually what is needed, and that the knowledge and the expertise and the capacity are out there, and not to think that it doesn't exist or that capacity isn't there right now. Cameron, what about you?
I sign off on everything that everyone is saying, and I just want to add that I do believe that I think that everything that we are talking about and everything that ails us in our nation could literally be solved within a very short period of time. We have way more than enough resources to take care of everything. And what I don't understand is why we do not move forward and listen to the people that have the knowledge, the capacity, and the competency to make those things happen, like the very people that are on this call. There is a nation filled with community-rooted leaders of color, community-rooted leaders that are accountable, also people who have dedicated their lives to decolonizing in terms of the system that they've been born in, like Lauren, who want to work for the liberation of everyone. And literally, if we literally flip the script and only gave even 50 to 70% of philanthropic funding to these types of organizations, we literally within 30 to 60 days would see a whole new trajectory and a whole new outcome and people not having what they need. Right now, we're looking at the largest wholesale possibility of people literally being hungry in the richest nation on the face of the earth. And that makes literally no sense. And it's because people are married for feeling comfortable and not actually solving the problem. The only other thing that I can come up with that is that they're okay with people being hungry, that you're okay with people not having what they need, that you're okay with children not being nourished and fed and not having electricity. If you're not okay with it, then do something about it. And don't do the same old thing that's gotten us into this mess. Change the trajectory and actually fund organizations like CJA, like EFOD, like Communities in Partnership, like Right to the City, like East Bay Redevelopment Corporation. All of these organizations are doing work on the ground and more. We can lead you to thousands more that are doing this work and hold us accountable for who we say we are and hold us accountable to our outcomes. Because literally, I want a day when every child in my community has what they need and I actually can move on to something else to do. That's exactly what I want. So put us to the test and actually transfer those funds and that support and that capacity building to these organizations so that we can actually make this dream a reality. We can be the America that we've always said that we wanted to be, but we've never been able to live out.
What a powerful way to end it. I know listeners can't see it, but there are big head nods, big snaps going off here. And I just want to say and express so much gratitude to all of you for coming on the show. Links to each individual loan fund will be in the show notes, as well as to the JTIC fund. Please check those out. Justice Funders also has a Funder Organizing Institute, I believe is the name of it, that's happening. So many great resources. And guess what, y'all? You also have power to build some bridges, bring your families into this, share this with people in your life. And that is another form of sharing power as well. All right. Thank y'all. Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth, and thank you so much for tuning in.